November in the Rockies carries a kind of silence you can feel in your chest. It isn't empty. It's heavy, still, and waiting. The kind of quiet that swallows sound, where even the wind seems careful not to disturb what the snow has claimed. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell. Every time you do, it helps stories like this one be heard. Stories that remind us that even in the coldest places, truth has a way of surfacing. This is the cold light of November. It was the second week of November 2011 when winter came early to the small mountain town of Silver Ridge, Colorado. The first snow fell fast and deep, covering the peaks, the old timber roads, and the narrow river valleys in white silence. Locals knew what that meant. The season of isolation had begun. Most summer cabins were already locked up, shutters closed, roads forgotten. Only a few people stayed year-round: loggers, park rangers, and a handful of families who called the mountains home. That year, one new face had arrived, a visitor seeking solitude. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, 33 years old, a painter from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Friends described her as reserved, disciplined, and strangely peaceful. The kind of artist who could spend entire days alone, painting the same horizon until the light changed, just enough to catch what she was looking for. Her work was known for its muted tones: silver skies, frost-bitten trees, rivers caught between ice and motion. She painted silence, her gallery director once said, as if it were a real place. In early November, Eleanor rented a remote cabin owned by a retired ranger named Richard Cole. The cabin sat half a mile off County Road 12, surrounded by pine and aspen. It had no Wi-Fi, no neighbors, and barely any cell signal. Exactly what she wanted. She told her sister, Caroline, that she needed a few days to reset before her next exhibition. 5 days, she said. Just me, the snow, and the canvas. Caroline laughed when she said it, thinking it sounded romantic, peaceful even. But later, she would replay that call over and over, wondering if she had missed something in her sister's voice. Eleanor left Santa Fe on November 7th and arrived in Silver Ridge the next afternoon. Locals remembered her stopping at the general store to buy groceries, bread, coffee, and a few cans of soup, before heading up the gravel road toward the cabin. She was polite, quiet, and smiling. That would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. On November 10th, a propane delivery driver noticed a gray Subaru parked near the Pine Hollow trailhead, its rear tires buried halfway in snow. He assumed the owner was a hiker staying nearby. But when the same car sat untouched 3 days later, its windshield layered with frost, he called the sheriff's office. Deputy Alan Mercer arrived at dusk. He found the Subaru locked, a sketchbook lying open on the passenger seat, and a wool hat tucked beside a half-empty thermos frozen solid. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no broken glass, just a still car in the middle of nowhere, waiting for someone who never returned. Following the narrow trail that wound through the woods, Mercer reached the cabin after 15 minutes. Snow had fallen hard, but the door wasn't locked. Inside, it was cold, colder than the air outside, the kind of chill that settles when a fire dies and no one is there to tend it. Eleanor's belongings were neatly arranged. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, clothes folded in careful stacks. A wool scarf draped over a chair. On a small table near the window, her sketchpad was open to a half-finished drawing, the outline of winter trees against a pale sky. Beneath it sat her journal. The last dated entry read, November 9th, 2011. It described the day's snowfall and how quiet the forest had become. Then, at the bottom of the page, 6 words written in hurried pencil. Someone walked past the window last night. Mercer froze. He searched the rest of the cabin. No overturned furniture, no forced entry, no struggle. Near the door hung her coat. By the woodpile outside, he noticed 2 impressions in the snow, large boot prints, half filled with ice, leading away from the clearing toward the trees. That same night, Sheriff David Rourke launched a full-scale search. Deputies, volunteers, and park rangers combed the woods by headlamp and floodlight. They traced the riverbanks, scanned the cliffs, and called out her name through the dark. By midnight, the temperature had fallen below 15 degrees. Snow thickened, and visibility dropped to near zero. The search was suspended until morning. Caroline Hayes arrived the next day after driving through the storm from New Mexico. She met the sheriff at the ranger station clutching a folder filled with photographs of her sister's paintings. When she saw the journal entry, she whispered, "She told me about that." According to Caroline, Eleanor had called her on the evening of November 9th. She said she had seen something, or someone, move past the cabin window, but told her not to worry. "Probably just a deer," she'd said, laughing it off. But in that moment, Caroline noticed something strange in her voice, a kind of breathlessness, as if she'd been holding something back. For days, search teams covered every ridge, every frozen creek bed, every logging road. They brought in dogs and drones, even a helicopter with heat sensors. Nothing. No tracks beyond the ones Mercer had found. No signs of a fall, a body, or any personal belongings. It was as if she had stepped outside and vanished into the white. Locals offered theories. Some said she'd gotten lost in the storm. Others whispered about a drifter seen near the old sawmill road that same week. A few believed she'd chosen to disappear, that the solitude she'd been chasing had finally swallowed her whole. But Sheriff Rourke never accepted that. She didn't run away, he told the press. She left her car, her supplies, her coat. People don't walk out into a Colorado winter without those things. Something happened to her out there. As weeks passed, Silver Ridge turned into a place divided between curiosity and guilt. Reporters filled the diner, photographers took pictures of the cabin, and strangers drove in from Denver to see the place where the artist vanished. The locals hated it. Many had joined the search themselves, trudging through snow for days, and now felt invaded by the outside world. One man, Tom Barlow, a volunteer firefighter, recalled years later how that search haunted him. "You don't forget something like that," he said. "It's not the things you find that stay with you. It's the things you don't." By December, the snow had buried everything. The official report listed Eleanor Hayes as missing and presumed deceased. The cabin was boarded up, the car towed, and the mountain returned to silence. Time passed, and Silver Ridge healed the only way small towns know how, quietly. The forest took back the trails. The cabin was sold twice. And for nearly a decade, Eleanor's name became a kind of ghost story, whispered on cold nights when the wind sounded like footsteps in the snow. Then came February 2020. That month, after a thaw loosened the ice along the northern ridge, a couple from Denver went snowshoeing in an area not marked on any official trail map. They followed a stream bed, half frozen, when something caught the husband's eye, a shape caught beneath the ice, wedged between roots and stone. He thought it was trash at first, an old bag, but when he pulled it free, he noticed the worn leather and the faint impression of two letters stamped into the strap, E.H. Inside were paint tubes hardened into solid lumps, brushes fused with resin, and a small sketchbook, its pages ruined by water, but still clinging together. On one torn page, written faintly in graphite, was a single sentence: "He keeps coming back. I don't think he knows I can see him." The couple drove straight to the sheriff's office. Within 24 hours, Sheriff Rourke reopened the file. After 9 years, the disappearance of Eleanor Hayes was no longer a mystery frozen in time. It was an active investigation again. And for the first time since that long November night, Silver Ridge began to remember. When the couple from Denver handed over the leather bag, the deputy on duty didn't say much. He simply carried it to the evidence room, placed it on a metal table, and called Sheriff David Rourke. By morning, the entire department knew what it was. The initials, the sketchbook, the brushes hardened by time. It all belonged to Eleanor Hayes. The discovery stirred something in the town that most had quietly buried. For nearly a decade, her name had faded into folklore. A story told to newcomers about the artist who disappeared into snow. Now, it was real again. And for Sheriff Rourke, who had led the original search, it felt like a wound reopening. He ordered the bag sent to the state forensic lab in Denver with instructions to handle it as if it were day one of an active crime. Technicians photographed every inch of the leather. The surface was worn, but a few scratches on the back appeared recent, not from weathering. Inside, moisture had fused several pages of the sketchbook together, but 3 were still partially legible. On the first, Eleanor had drawn the outline of pine branches bending under snow. On the second, a rough sketch of the cabin window, seen from inside, with a shadowed shape beyond the glass. And on the third page, written faintly across the top margin, the same words the sheriff would read again and again that night: "He keeps coming back. I don't think he knows I can see him." The handwriting was confirmed as hers. The paper stock matched other sketchbooks recovered from her Santa Fe studio. Forensics also found something else. A small stain on the inner lining of the bag that reacted to luminol. Tests confirmed it was human blood. DNA analysis would take several weeks, but for Rourke, that was enough to reclassify the file. Eleanor Hayes was no longer a missing person. The case was now a suspected homicide. News spread quickly. The story reached Denver by the weekend, and television crews drove up through the melting snow to film the same dirt roads that had once led to nowhere. The town of Silver Ridge, with its population barely over 800, found itself once again at the center of attention. Locals avoided reporters, but the cameras still lingered outside the diner, the gas station, the sheriff's office. Every face looked familiar, every stranger a question. Rourke called in additional help from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Among them was Detective Sarah Leland, a specialist in cold cases. She had spent nearly 20 years re-examining forgotten files, and she understood something most investigators didn't. Time doesn't always erase evidence, it just hides it. She began by reconstructing Eleanor's final known days, using the original reports. The timeline was painfully simple. She had checked into the cabin on November 8th, last seen at the general store later that afternoon. Her car was found on the 10th, the cabin inspected on the 11th, and the search called off by the end of the month. The case file contained hundreds of pages of notes, maps, and photographs, but nothing that pointed to where she went or who might have followed her. Leland revisited every piece of physical evidence. She read through the first responders' statements, examined the original photographs of the boot prints, and noticed something small but critical. The prints were deeper on one side, as if the person who made them was carrying weight or walking unevenly. She also compared the pattern to standard outdoor boot treads sold in Colorado in 2011. One match stood out, a brand called Timberline, a type used by loggers and maintenance workers in the area. It wasn't much, but it was the first tangible lead in 9 years. She also tracked down the cabin's original owner, Richard Cole, who was now living in a retirement home near Fort Collins. When she showed him the photograph of the bag, he leaned back in silence for a long moment. "I knew she never just walked off," he finally said. He explained that he had rented the cabin to several visitors before Eleanor, mostly writers or hikers, but never had a single incident. Then Leland asked him something no one had before: whether anyone else might have known she was staying there. Cole hesitated before answering. "Probably," he said. "The notice board at the general store. That's where she found my number. It's where everyone posts things." That detail, ordinary at the time, now felt crucial. Anyone who frequented the store that week would have known the cabin was occupied, and by a woman alone. Leland drove to Silver Ridge and met with the store's longtime cashier, Linda Reeves, who had worked there for over 20 years. When shown Eleanor's photograph, Linda's eyes softened. "I remember her," she said, polite, soft-spoken. "She bought canned soup and coffee, wore this green coat and a red scarf." Then Linda paused. "You know who else was here that day? Travis Holt." The name wasn't in any of the original reports. Linda explained that Travis was a local handyman who did odd jobs for the store, cutting wood, clearing snow, repairing signs. He was quiet, polite, and usually kept to himself. "He was stacking firewood near the door when she was here," she said. "I remember because he stopped working for a second and just watched her walk out." Detective Leland found Holt still living in the area, in a small trailer near the southern edge of town. He was 51 now, weathered, soft-spoken, and missing 2 front teeth. When asked about Eleanor, he said he remembered her only vaguely. "The artist lady," as he put it. He admitted he was in the store that day but denied ever seeing her again. He said he had worked for the county that winter clearing snow, but records showed he had been suspended from that job in late October. When Leland asked about the Timberline boots, he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I had a pair," he said. "Everyone did back then." She noticed his hands trembled slightly when he said it. He claimed he lost them years ago, but his story changed twice within the same interview. Still, there was no direct evidence connecting him to the cabin. Forensics came back 2 weeks later. The blood found inside Eleanor's bag was hers, but there was more. Embedded in the leather strap were microscopic fibers, synthetic, dark green, consistent with a type of work jacket, commonly worn by maintenance and forestry crews. The CBI lab also recovered a partial fingerprint from the inner pocket. It wasn't enough for an immediate match, but the ridge pattern suggested it belonged to a male. Rourke and Leland reviewed the findings late one evening at the sheriff's office. The evidence was circumstantial, But the pattern was forming. Someone had been near that cabin. Someone who knew the area well enough to move unseen through snow and darkness. They decided to re-interview several people who had volunteered during the original search, focusing on those familiar with the terrain around Pine Hollow. One of the names on that list was Carl Benson, a former forest ranger who had coordinated several search groups in 2011. He'd since retired but still lived nearby. When they visited him, he greeted them with a cautious smile. "That was a bad winter," he said. "Coldest I can remember." He admitted he had helped organize the search grids but denied any knowledge beyond that. When shown photos of the bag, he frowned. "That's strange," he said. "That area where they found it. It was outside the original perimeter. We never went that far north." Leland asked why. He hesitated. "Too rough," he said. "Steep drop-offs, dangerous footing. We assumed she wouldn't have gone that way." After the interview, Rourke couldn't shake the feeling that Benson was hiding something. Not guilt, but avoidance. He'd seen that look before. The kind of haunted fatigue that came from people who had seen too much and said too little. Meanwhile, the town began to divide again. Some were relieved that the case was finally being investigated properly. Others resented the attention. Reporters returned, and with them came outsiders hungry for clues, filming the river, the trails, the cabin, now rotting in disrepair. A new kind of fear settled in. The quiet dread of realizing that whoever had done this might have been one of them. Then came a break that no one expected. A forensic technician reviewing the old evidence logs noticed a discrepancy. Among the items collected from the cabin in 2011 was a broken flashlight found near the back door. It had been tested for fingerprints and then returned to storage. Back then, the technology couldn't recover degraded prints from textured surfaces. But now, with new enhancement methods, they tried again. Under infrared scanning, a partial print appeared on the lens cap. Not Eleanor's, not the deputy's. When the system cross-checked the database, it returned a match. The print belonged to Travis Holt. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was enough for a warrant. Detectives searched Holt's property the following morning. Inside his shed, they found a box of old tools, fishing gear, and a pair of timberline boots coated with dust. The soles matched the photographs of the prints found near the cabin almost perfectly. Holt was brought in for questioning. He denied everything at first, insisting the flashlight must have been left there by accident. But when confronted with the boot evidence, his story began to shift. He admitted he had walked near the cabin once or twice that winter, claiming he was checking his traps in the woods. He said he saw lights on one night and got curious, but never spoke to Eleanor. Leland asked why he never told anyone that during the original search. He stared at the floor and said quietly, "Because I didn't think it mattered." After 6 hours, he was released without charges. The district attorney wanted more. DNA, a confession, something definitive. But the clock was ticking. Word of the investigation had leaked, and Holt had already stopped showing up at work. He was seen driving out of town late one night, his truck heading north toward the old mining roads. The next morning, officers found his trailer empty. Inside, they discovered a half-burned notebook in the stove. The pages that survived were covered in fragmented sentences. One read, "She looked right at me." Another said, "I never meant for it to happen." It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to confirm what Sheriff Rourke already knew deep down. Eleanor Hayes hadn't simply vanished into the cold. Someone had been there with her, and that someone was still out there. And in a town where every face looked familiar. That was the most unsettling truth of all. The first snow of February had barely melted when the man who had been a shadow for 9 years decided to become invisible again. Travis Holt's truck was seen before sunrise, cutting north along the old mining road past Birch Gulch, the bed of it dusted white, the tailpipe trailing breath. By noon, the sheriff's office knew he was gone. They didn't issue an alert right away. They didn't need to. In a place like Silver Ridge, news travels faster than sirens. Deputies drove the ridge lines and the dead-end spurs where hunters park in the fall. They checked the logging landings, the service gates, the place locals simply called the switchbacks, a tangle of dirt cut into the mountain like scribbles on a map. Somewhere up there, the road gives out and the timber takes over. Somewhere up there, a man can disappear. Detective Sarah Leland didn't wait on the roadblocks. She went back to the evidence. In her experience, people who live small lives leave small trails. You look for what they can't help repeating. A habit, a route, a tool they favor. She pulled Holt's file again and noticed something easy to overlook. The campground citations. 2 unpaid warnings from a decade earlier for unauthorized camping off service roads, both signed by the same ranger. The notes included GPS approximations, not precise, but close enough to draw a circle. The circle overlapped with a creek drainage that ran north to the ravine, where Eleanor's leather bag had surfaced in the thaw. By late afternoon, a search team hiked in under cloud and thin light. They found tire trace frozen into ruts, old, but still visible where evergreens had shielded the ground. Snowshoe tracks crisscrossed the hillside, fresh enough to hold shape, 100 yards beyond a faded, road closed sign. The creek angled through a narrow cut. That's where they saw it. A splash of blue tangled in alders, the corner of a tarp fluttering against ice. Behind it, tucked under a lean of deadfall, was a shelter you wouldn't notice unless you were standing on it. Tarps over saplings, a ring of stones, a pallet dragged in to keep off the ground. There were no footprints inside, no heat, no food. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry. They moved slowly, as if sound itself might disturb what the past had arranged. On a stump near the shelter, they found a coil of fishing line, a box of 22 rounds, a paper sack with coffee grounds hard as brick. Beneath the pallet, in a shallow cavity lined with river rock, a single mason jar lay capped and dirty. Inside were 3 things: a brass watch with a cracked face, a button the color of wet bark, and a thumbnail-sized fold of paper so fragile it nearly collapsed in the gloved hand. Back at the lab, under a fume hood and a microscope, the paper was coaxed open. The graphite was smeared and faint, but the lines were unmistakable. A sketch of the cabin window from the inside looking out. It wasn't a copy. It was hers. The button brought the first clean break. Caroline Hayes identified it immediately as one from the brown wool coat Eleanor wore in Santa Fe winters. There were photographs of her in it, one taken 2 weeks before she left. The same matte sheen, the same shallow notch where thread had once chafed against a strap. The watch, though waterlogged, held a name engraved in shallow script on the case back. Hayes. It had been a gift from their mother for Eleanor's 27th birthday. The corroded crown was frozen at 11:52. There is a theater to detail, but Leland had learned not to fall for it. Watches stop for 100 reasons. Buttons come loose in a gust of wind. Only DNA tells you what the story refuses to. 2 days later, the state lab called. The hair trapped in the jar's grit contained a root bulb. The mitochondrial profile matched the Hayes family. The partial nuclear profile matched the DNA in the leather bag. The jar had kept what snow and time could not ruin. For the first time, they had Eleanor's biological trace in a place Holt had lived. Rourke authorized another warrant. Holt's empty trailer gave up little else. A burned notebook, a sharpened awl, the receipts of a life lived just off the ledger. But the shed out back kept its last secret poorly, behind hanging coils of extension cord, under 2 rusted saw blades. An old canvas work jacket slumped on a nail. Its fabric had the deep-pressed wear marks of a long winter, elbows polished almost smooth, a cuff torn and patched with dental floss. When the CBI techs ran a vacuum trace and tape lifts along the inner lining, what they collected looked like grit. Short, dark green synthetic fibers, identical in chemical signature and extrusion pattern to the fibers embedded in the leather strap of Eleanor's bag. The match was not an accident. It was a continuity. The jacket to the bag to the ravine to the creek that runs down toward Silver Ridge like a vein. An arrest warrant went out statewide. The sheriff's office broadcast the plate and the make. A snowcat crew working above the county line found a blue tarp crushed into snow at a turnout and called it in, but there was no truck. Someone in a roadside bar swore they'd seen Holt buy gas cans a week earlier, then changed their story twice. It was Carl Benson, the retired ranger from the original search, who finally brought the news that mattered. He walked into the station without a hat, the cold still in his beard, and set a folded paper map on the counter. "If he knows these hills the way I think he does," he said, tapping the contour lines, "he'll go where men like us don't." "Where's that?" Rourke asked. Benson traced the creek line north, then east, to a place the map didn't name. "There's an old roading cut here from the logging days. It slides in wet years. There's a coal pocket that makes the ravine warm enough to stand in when the air bites. We never set a grid there in 2011 because we thought no one would risk it. But a man who spent winters alone learns things the rest of us don't want to know." They went at first light. Deputies, a state trooper, Benson and Leland. The hike in was slick and mean, the kind of mountain walking that makes you count each step and measure each breath. At the bend where the creek hissed under ice, the ravine opened into a pocket cut from rock and root. The coal seam, shallow and black as oil, breathed out a thin warmth that made the snow slump into stalactites. On a shelf of rock above the seam, there were prints, not fresh, but crisp enough to read. The heel dragged on the right foot. The same uneven weight as before, a line of ash, no more than a finger wide, snaked toward a shadowed overhang. That's where they saw the second shelter. It was built with the same careful poverty as the first. Scavenged lumber, tarps, hand-twisted wire. Inside lay a bedroll, a tin cup, a battered paperback swollen by damp. On a stone nearby, 5 small objects were arranged in a row as neat as coins: a stripped pencil, a bottle cap, a washer, a thin, twisted ring, and a key. The key was small, the kind that opened suitcases. Even covered in rust, it had a hotel's tidy exactness. Leland didn't speak. She just slipped it into an evidence bag and nodded for the others to keep going. The overhang led into a slot where water had carved a crooked mouth out of clay. It wasn't a cave so much as a throat. They had to crawl the last 6 feet, one by one, careful not to knock the ceiling down on themselves. The slot opened into a pocket the size of a small bedroom. What they found there was not a crime scene. It was a museum. On the far wall, where frost did not hold, someone had glued paper with pine resin. Dozens of small squares, thick with age and water stains, covered the rock in a nervous grid. Some were blank, their ink washed out to ghosts. Others carried writing, carefully copied from a single hand. Weather observations, the phases of the moon, a tally of days, and between them, like a cough in the middle of a prayer, sketches, quick, lucid, precise, of a cabin window, of bare trees against a winter sky, of a hand holding a brush. They were not Holt's. They did not belong to him. They were taken. In the corner under a slab of bark, a metal ammo can sat welded shut by rust. Benson's pocket crowbar made quick work of the seam. Inside, wrapped first in melted plastic and then in oiled cloth, was a folding knife. The rubberized grip had the feel of something made for men who work in cold. It was a Timberline, the same model the lab had linked by tread to the prints outside the cabin. On the hinge, in a place Leland knew was a survivor of time, there bloomed a brown-black trace. Under a microscope, that trace would confirm what the story had already said: Eleanor's blood. And on the inner notch, the faintest echo of a different profile, male, consistent with Holt. When they stepped back into the light, the sound they heard was not a voice. It was the scrape of boots on shale from the slope above the pocket. A shape moved between trees, too close to be an accident. Rourke called out the name they'd been waiting to say aloud. The shape stopped. A man stepped from behind spruce, thin and wind-burned, beard creased with ice, eyes black with the kind of exhaustion that looks like calm. He lifted both hands, palms open. He looked, for a second, like someone who had been walking a long time and had simply reached the end of the road. "I'm tired," he said, voice small in the cold. "Sheriff, I'm tired." They took him down without a fight. In the back of the cruiser, he asked for coffee and didn't drink it. In the interview room, under a camera and the buzz of fluorescent light, Travis Holt spoke for the first time in a decade about a night he had rehearsed in silence. The story came slowly at first, not the confession of a man eager to unburden himself, but the litany of a person who had learned he could live with a thing if he never named it. He said he had walked past the cabin because he knew the forest paths by heart, not because he was hunting, not because he had planned anything, but because he couldn't sleep, and because he had seen the lamp through the trees the night before, and because light in a window has a way of asking questions a man like him doesn't know how to refuse. He said he had stopped by the woodpile. He said he had watched her move through the small room. He said she did not scream when she saw him through the glass. She stiffened and turned out the lamp. He waited in the settling dark until he heard the spin of a deadbolt. He said he walked away then, back toward the creek, and would have kept going if not for the sound that came next, the faint clink of a chain being set into its catch on the door. The chain he later broke and claimed he barely touched. The details changed as he spoke them, the way truths do when dragged through the mind of a man who has convinced himself that intention matters more than outcome. He said he knocked, soft at first, then harder. He said he meant to tell her he would leave. He said when she opened the door on the chain, the cold rushed in and she told him to go, and he tried to speak and the chain snapped. He said her hand slipped on the table. He said the lamp fell and he grabbed her wrist to stop the flame, and his other hand came down without thinking, and the sound that followed was the sound that would live in him every November of his life. He said she didn't move, and he knew too much about cold and time to wait for someone to find him there. He said he carried her. He said he used the river line because it was the only path he could walk without leaving a trail, because he had learned the ways the mountain hides a body from scavengers and men alike. He said he meant to bring her to help, and he said he meant to lay her down, and he said he meant to leave her where the water hummed, and he said he couldn't feel his hands, and he said that when he pressed his fingers to her neck he felt something, but he didn't trust it. He said he opened the knife because he thought he had to choose quickly between what law asks and what fear answers. He said he could not do it. He said the air was so cold it felt like sand. He said when he checked again, there was nothing to find. No one in that room believed every word. No one expected to. Confessions are not maps. They are weather. They change as you stand in them. Leland asked why he took the bag, the button, the watch, the sketches. He said he didn't know. He said he told himself he was keeping a record, and then he told himself he was atoning, and then he told himself he was making sure no one forgot, and then he told himself nothing at all. When he ran out of answers, he asked what time it was. When they told him, he nodded, as if expecting a different number could change a decade. The district attorney charged him with second-degree murder, felony burglary, and tampering with evidence. The defense signaled they would argue a version of panic, accident, exposure, the slope of a story where intent slips and the winter finishes what a man begins. But the forensics didn't care about slope. The knife told its small story. The fibers told theirs. The fingerprint on the flashlight at the back door, once dismissed as noise in a winter of too much snow, spoke in the flat kind of way that convinces juries. The jar said the quiet part out loud. He had returned to the place where the river moved her, not once, not twice, but again and again, gathering pieces, arranging them. Whatever he called it, it was keeping. He pled to avoid a trial that would have lasted a spring and eaten a town. The judge, spare in his words, called it a case defined by the harm done, and the harm continued. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole. When the judge asked if he wished to speak, Holt said only, "I thought I could carry it." Caroline Hayes sat in the first row, her face unreadable. Afterward, she told reporters that accountability is not the same thing as relief, and that her sister had loved late light on winter branches more than any kind of silence. "He doesn't get to own her story," she said. "We do." In the months that followed, the ravine thawed and healed the way mountains do, by pretending nothing happened. Volunteers, some who had searched in 2011 and some who were children then, hiked to the place the sheriff would never list on a map. They left a small plaque anchored in rock, nothing more than a name and a year and a line from one of Eleanor's notes. Light changes everything. In June, the cabin was finally taken down. It didn't feel like erasure. It felt like closing a door. Sheriff Rourke typed his last entry in a case file he had carried across 2 administrations and 3 different county budgets. He wrote that the investigation had not been solved by one miracle piece of evidence, but by the aggregation of small truths: a print on a forgotten flashlight, a fiber left behind by the work jacket a man wore into winter, a button saved by habit and by ice. He wrote that assumptions are enemies of search, and that maps are not the same as ground. He wrote that what saved the case was not genius, but time at the table, patience with the parts of a story that don't want to sit together. Silver Ridge did not become famous. The town did not want to be. The river kept talking its low, constant talk. The general store sold bread and coffee and bait. The hills turned gold and then white and then seed green again. People learned to drive the mining roads a little slower. They locked their back doors and replaced the latches that had never fit quite right. And in November, when the first snow fell and the quiet came on strong, some remembered how a woman who painted silence once walked into a mountain and did not walk back out. They said her name, and then they said nothing at all, which is another way of remembering. If you've stayed with us through this story, thank you. These are not easy things to hold, but telling them matters. If you want more stories told with this care, and if you believe, like we do, that attention can be a kind of light, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell. It helps this work reach the people who need it, and it keeps memories like Eleanor's where they belong, alive, seen, and unsilenced.